Our next speaker is no stranger to smart packaging, and it's my pleasure to now introduce James Lee. James is the Director of Innovation Solutions Group at Jones Healthcare Group, based in London, Ontario, Canada, and they're a leader in folding cartons, labels, and contract pharmaceutical filling. In his role, James focuses on new packaging technologies for tomorrow and their potential impact and outcomes for consumers, patients, and brand owners. James has over 25 years of experience in pre-press and print production with organizations such as TC and SGS Co., and with successful project execution under a varying set of global verticals throughout his career. He brings a diverse understanding of the packaging market with an eye for reproduction quality under differing print methods. James also serves as co-chair for the North American Industry Association IntelliPack, to help accelerate the adoption of intelligent packaging products in the marketplace. So welcome, James. And James is going to speak to us about manufacturing smart packaging and why.
Can you guys hear me? I don't know if you guys can hear me, but I hope you can. Oh, perfect. All right. So I got the response that yes, you can. So hi, thanks, Christina. Sorry I have a long-winded intro bio, but that's what the marketing team did. It's unfortunate that we couldn't meet in Montreal. I really want to have a smoked meat sandwich, but can't get that in London. So anyhow, moving on. I was asked to speak about manufacturing smart packaging and why we do it in regards to supply chain. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Next slide, please. So very quickly, I'm just going to talk a little bit about who Jones is, different connected packaging solutions for today connected packaging solutions that are available on the market, and what we can do today in terms of manufacturing, with a few examples of use case in there as well. Next slide, please. And next slide again. So quickly about Jones. Jones is a company, we're about 140 years old in our roots, but officially the company I work for right now is actually 101 from its incorporation date. Now, we've been doing work in the area of healthcare packaging since the very beginning, and really focused on working with the industry to find solutions for pharmaceutical companies and pharmacies, which is something we've been doing for quite some time. Next slide, please. But to show you the fact that we're kind of doing the supply chain, I guess you could say, or we're part of that supply and value chain, we actually have 3 different divisions. So when it comes to those divisions, our first division is where we do packaging the noun, cartons and labels. We manufacture things like folding cartons and pressure-sensitive labels, and occasionally intelligent packaging as well. Our packaging services division is packaging the verb. So we actually receive bulk pharmaceuticals at that facility, and we fill them into different package types. And then finally, we have pharmacy and medication adherence, where we actually sell packaging the noun to somebody who's going to do it, the verb, which is a pharmacy. So anything that a pharmacist requires to dispense medication, any of the packaging requirements like labels and vials and cards, is something that we provide to them as well. So we're represented across different areas of the supply chain. Now, when it comes to me and my team, we're something called the Innovation Solutions Group. So we work for all divisions trying to find different solutions to different problems that we have or challenges that our customers pose to us. Next slide. Next slide, please. Oh, back one, sorry. So this is just, an idea of some of our sites. We actually have 5 sites, not 4, 2 in North America and 3 in Europe. But probably what would have been better is for me to have shown you a slide that actually indicates all the places we ship to. Because really, even though we are primarily based in terms of manufacturing and services in Canada, we ship all over the world. And we ship to our own locations in Europe. We ship to different drug companies and distribution systems in Asia, South America, even Africa for that matter. So we've got a pretty good understanding of what is involved in trying to trace where medications are. Next slide, please. So when we talk about connected packaging solutions, we're going to talk about stuff that's specific towards two different problems that are in the current supply chain. The first problem that I'd say that we have, because there's many more different challenges we can discuss, is I'm going to discuss some stuff regarding diversion, which really can be addressed by track and trace. So that's where a package is sold where it's not meant to be sold. So, you know, items may have been diverted out of the authorized supply chain and sold in different retail environments. And then the other one that I'll talk about is environmental monitoring, which is something that's very important, especially in days like today. Next slide, please. So, next slide. Oh, back one, sorry. There might be a little bit of a lag on my side, apologize. So something that we've done is we like to break smart packaging or connected packaging into what we call different stages or levels. And really what that means is trying to determine what level of intelligence has been put in that package. Pretty much every package that is for sale today on the market at least falls into that stage 1 category because it provides information to things like POS systems through barcodes. So, you know, that package has that universal barcode, and when that cash register system scans it, it knows what is in that package and how much it charges. When we start getting into stage 2 products, that's where we do things like add QR codes and start linking people to information similar to what the tap scan system does, where, you know, you can scan a particular barcode, and then from that information, you could actually present information to the consumer. Stage 3 is where we start taking those linked, connected concepts and we start making them unique on the item level. So that's where we might use something like variable QR codes or NFCs that have unique IDs. That way we can actually identify individual packages. Now, when it comes to pharmaceuticals, most pharmaceuticals globally fall into a stage 3 category nowadays. And the reason why is because there is strong supply chain tracking happening in the pharmaceutical industry where every package generally has some type of serialized identifier so that the manufacturers and authorities can know where that package came from, and in the case of something like a recall, can do that. Stage 4 is where we start doing things like placing sensor technologies into packaging. That's where we might get more information from what's going on inside a package, and the package itself would connect to a consumer's or a consumer smartphone to provide more information and read that sensor data and provide that linking towards the internet. Whereas stage 5, we start getting into things such as packages that are capable of actually sending their own signals. So that's something that Jones works on in the area of medication adherence, but that's not what we're here to talk about today. Next slide, please. It's frozen. Oh. Okay, so we can talk about a couple of types of connected packaging. So one thing I would say is we're going to focus more on the supply chain piece. So really, what's that all about? It's about knowing where a package is. And you basically get into 2 types of technologies for that. The electronic category, where you're using things like wireless radio frequencies to actually speak to systems. So those are things like NFCs or different types of RFID packages. Bluetooth Low Energy is something that's coming along as well in that space. So that way you can uniquely identify a package. Whereas on the optical side, that's where we start getting into barcodes. Barcodes that are simple, like the standard GS1 barcodes that are used for electronic article numbering for a POS system, but you could also get into 2-dimensional barcodes that could drive systems like TapScan, that could drive systems like other systems that are out there on the market. You can also look at doing things like Digimarc. which is utilizing an invisible barcode technology, and that's actually being utilized in end-of-life type work right now in Europe, where Digimarc barcodes are embedded inside packages so that when they get to a recycling facility, they can actually read to identify the resin type for sorting. So that's an example of how Digimarc can be used. And also things like customized tagants and stuff like that as well. Next slide, please. So what we want to do is, if we can take that concept of connection, that gives us the idea of being able to track what's going on with a package inside that supply chain. The next thing is, what could we do if we start integrating sensors into that? There are different sensor types available, but one that's commonly used today is a time temperature indicator to determine if a product has been in a supply chain and left the specific environment it needed to be shipped in. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. Next slide, please. So hopefully that gave you an idea of a little bit of why, and also some different types of connected packages types that are available. But what can we actually do today? Next slide, please. So right now, I'd say that where we see smart packaging, we're kind of limited at the moment to a few simple technologies right now, because that's what's manufacturable. We have near-field communications, so we all have NFC tags on us, whether they be inside our phones or in our credit cards, or for other purposes. We might use NFC just as a door access system, for example. RFID is something that's heavily used. It's actually, you probably don't even realize you might have RFIDs that are inside your clothing, for example, which are used for inventory management at a lot of the fast fashion retailers, for example. But then we also can do things like some basic printed sensors. Now, Jones has focused on developing printed sensors based on the idea of conductive circuit loops. But then at the same time, some of our partners, technology partners out there, are doing things like thermistors for time temperature indicators, or humidistats to determine some things in terms of moisture. So that really provides that environmental sensing. So that last couple of slides, I was showing the idea of taking that radio frequency connection component and integrating that together with a sensor. Next slide, please. So I'm not going to talk about consumer experience because, Terry already did a great job explaining that. But really, where it comes to supply chain, we worry about product integrity, and we worry about inventory and product life cycle. So, in the area of integrity, we think about things like authentication for counterfeit products. We can do things like track whether a package is being diverted. If we integrate things like time temperature indicators, we can see if something is safe to use. So there's a lot of different applications that are available. Next slide, please. So at Jones, for example, and we're not the only ones, there are other people who can do this. This is applicable to both NFC and RFID style tags. We have the ability to actually integrate NFCs and RFIDs inside standard conventional packaging. We do that in a way that they can be hidden. We can do that in a way that they can integrate things like brake sensors and stuff like that. So that's an example of something that's real world that can be done today, and we've done several projects in this area. I'll actually give an example of how RFID is actually used in a real world scenario as well. But next slide, please. So we talked about the fact that if we're integrating something like an NFC or an RFID, when that consumer interacts with it, or if we have automated reading systems at various different points in the supply chain, we can start uncovering information. We know which package because we have unique IDs on them. We know who's actually scanning that device, scanning that package, because often we'll get a device ID, so we can see if somebody's repeating a scan. We generally know when and where. We can get the time, obviously, but the location of interactions, we have a general idea of where they are, and we could start measuring metrics. But what happens is that with that data, we could utilize that to start identifying gray market diversion. So if you have a product that was released in Canada, but you're seeing tons of interaction with that product coming out of the Middle East, it might be a pretty good idea that you could surmise that that package has been diverted and those products have been diverted. So now you can actually try and trace it in the supply chain. Next slide, please. So here's an example of RFID and how it's used. Now, when we talk about supply chain or value chain, this is very small. It's internal inside a hospital. So right now at North York General Hospital in the Toronto area, pharmacies would dispense, the hospital pharmacy would dispense different medications for patients, and they had to try and keep up with all of these different patients and where medications were, track things like expiry dates of medications. Some medications are only good when dispensed for a very short period of time. And so they started tagging all of their medication dispense trays. And in that tagging process, they were able to really change how they were tracking everything in their system in an automatic fashion, so they could reduce the amount of time that trays were restocked, and they could also determine, what was the actual benefits on the cost of that. Next slide. Now, here's an example of some printed sensors. Now, this isn't something crazy like loop that we print for some of our medication packaging, but this is an example of a printed sensor. Next slide. But this is something I wanted to show because I thought this was interesting. Right now, I happen to be running a study in the United States of cancer patients on a specific medication. And so they're utilizing packages that have these conductive sensor loops inside. But you can see now from that map, I can actually see where these patients are and how many events are occurring and how many drugs they're taking. So that's just an actual snapshot of real live data from a week or two ago. But what it tells you, we can kind of learn more. I care about the medication adherence piece, but I could potentially take that data and start integrating that into the supply chain so that a drug distributor knows that more of these drugs seem to be showing up in the St. Louis area, for example. I think that's what it's showing. So that they know that they can divert more product to those distribution centers servicing that area. Next slide, please. We talked about the idea of a time temperature indicator. That's something that you could do today. And this is an example of an Avery Dennison product. It's a label that has an integrated battery, integrated temperature sensor, and it can actually record information about a piece of an item moving through the supply chain to ensure it hasn't left that special cold chain world. We see an example of seafood, but in context, a good example of how this could be used today is vaccines. We know that the vaccines that we have available to us for the coronavirus are actually very much in the area of super cold, low temperature supply chains. And if those vaccines leave that supply chain for an extended period of time, it makes it it basically deactivates the vaccine. So there's huge benefit and reason as to why we would track time and temperature. Next slide, please. So I think I've shown you that there's different ways that tracking a package, being able to know where it is, really benefits the supply chain. We can really increase that visibility of that specific asset. And, that allows us to do things like divert assets towards different locations where they have lower levels and things like that. We can improve some levels of productivity by basically making it so that the package itself speaks to the systems. so that you don't necessarily need to have people who are recording what's happening in that supply chain, because it can happen automatically. And then there's also things you could do, like, we can look at things like theft, loss prevention being used with these technologies. We could look at the fact that we can parlay that information into that consumer engagement side of things. So I guess that's it for me, trying to quickly tell you about how this could work in supply chain. There are plenty of other potential use cases available today that are happening today in the real world. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you very much, James. That was excellent.